Hello, class. This video will look at FDR and the New Deal. But before we get started, I just kind of want to backtrack. Looking at the Roosevelt election, this might be just a quick review of where we left off in the past video. Really started in 1932, we just want to just really quick recap. Herbert Hoover is running against the Democratic nominee Franklin Roosevelt, who was governor of New York at this time. Um, but besides being a Democrat, which in this election in 1932 was actually a benefit, Roosevelt was blessed with a personality that exudes charm, wit, intelligence, and self-assurance. He was a mesmerizing speaker, which in the era of radio was crucially important. Um, he had a strong voice that resonated, and he had a gift for employing phrases that struck a chord with his listeners. For example, in a campaign speech, he used the term "forgotten man," and his nomination acceptance speech for the Democratic Party, he pledged a New Deal for the American people. These simple descriptors were exactly right for the time and place and contributed greatly to his success in the election. Now, Roosevelt's political stance, he wasn't a spendthrift in normal times. Roosevelt's liberal use of government resources to deal with the Depression as governor of New York was in his favor. Roosevelt felt the needs of his people took precedence over a strict budget in times of hardship. You contrast that with Herbert Hoover, rejecting direct relief, feeling like it's going to undermine the morale of the American people and his ideas and values of rugged individualism. And remember, this went against what the general mood of America was as the Depression got worse and worse and worse. Franklin Roosevelt as governor, he opened up the state's resources in relief of those hardest hit by unemployment and bank closings. And after his nomination, Roosevelt went on the stump with speeches and whistle stop tours to really vigorously campaign for the presidency. Um, during these whistle stop tours and stuff, Roosevelt understood the importance of projecting a strong and vital appearance in the frightening times of the Depression, and this was a challenge for him because he was stricken with polio in 1921, and he had been confined to a wheelchair, and so he spent years trying to recuperate from the illness and its terrible effects. And so, with physical therapy, he was successful in restoring a small portion of mobility to his affected muscles. However, the lingering paralysis in his legs would not allow him to stand on his own or even to walk with metal braces. Um, and so Roosevelt and his staff, when he was giving public appearances, were careful that voters only saw him, whether in person or in photograph, either sitting in an ordinary chair or standing with unobtrusive support, such as an aide or a podium. The press abstained from dwelling on his infirmity, and his political opponents wisely refrained from making an issue of his misfortune. Um, he was, as a testament to his resilience, he was never really prevented from fulfilling the duties of office of president due to his disability. And according to longtime friends and acquaintances, meeting the challenge of polio really gave Roosevelt this tenacity, sympathy, and tolerance, traits that were really needed during these Depression years, and perhaps even more in the during the war years. Somebody else that helped him out immensely was his wife Eleanor, aided him, throughout his political career. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt, who perhaps might be one of the ugliest women, in the history of America. That's a joke. championed the programs for the poor, the oppressed, the dispossessed. She had a genuine and heartfelt concern for the plight of hungry Americans during the Depression, and this endeared her to the American people, while at the same time her intelligence and her tireless advocacy impressed even her husband's enemies. So she was a huge contributor to some of these programs and policies that Roosevelt is going to put into place. 1932 campaign, Roosevelt, bold, energetic, optimistic, promising a New Deal, New Deal, New Deal, excuse me, but really vague about the specific, excuse me. Many of his speeches were written for him by what's called, or what was known as, his Brain Trust, which is a group of young college professors with innovative ideas about the economy and government. And so, even though the path ahead was not clear, and even even in Roosevelt's mind, it wasn't really 100% thought out. The country was restless for change, and Roosevelt and the Democrats could give it to them. You compare that to Hoover and the Republicans, who are pretty overwhelmed with the Depression, and even though Hoover in the last weeks put a lot of hours in attempting to hold back a complete economic collapse, he was discouraged. He was exhausted. Crowds were apathetic towards them, or even hostile, and so, to no one's surprise, like we said, Roosevelt won pretty easily. And by the time he takes office, 25% of the workforce was idle, unemployed, 50% in many cities. 8 out of 10 banks had closed the doors. So this is what Roosevelt, comes into when he takes office on March 4th, 1933. And in his inaugural speech, all right, he pledges a new deal for the American people and cautioned them against giving in to fear. He said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Fear is what's going to paralyze us, what's going to hold us back. We can't be afraid to act. He says that he's going to address these concerns and these problems that the Great Depression has confronted with the American people with a tenacity and with an aggressiveness, just like he would if America was under attack by a foreign foe. And he says that the Congress, he expects the U.S. Congress to support him in this, and here's the thing that worries his critics: if the U.S. Congress does not support him in these measures to tackle the demands of the Depression, that he will ask for the one last remaining thing: broad executive power to wage war against this Depression. That phrase, broad executive power, really raised some eyebrows with his conservative critics, because they feel like Roosevelt says that if you don't go along with me, I'm going to take over essentially the government. I'm going to act like a dictator. And so people are really weary about how much power Roosevelt wanted to have. And so Roosevelt, when he comes into office, he immediately, begins instituting a series of bold, nearly revolutionary reforms. The first thing he does, March 6th, 2 days later after his inaugural address, he closed down the banks and he announces a bank holiday. This, is going to give banks relief from the threats of those bank runs that, ruined the banks, but sent anxiety through the country as people wondered how safe their money was and what powers the government might give itself in the name of emergency. So Roosevelt is going to do two things to calm down the fears. March 9th, he's going to call a special session of Congress to deal with this banking crisis. Congress immediately passes the Emergency Banking Relief Act that allowed the president to regulate banking transactions and foreign exchange and to reopen those banks that were still solvent. To reassure the people that that these reforms are going to be good for them. He gives his first of what is called his half-hour fireside chats. This is when he addresses the American people, the American nation, via radio. And through this, he can reassure the American people that their money was now safer in a bank vault than under their mattress or in any other less than safe places in their home. With these kind of insurances and legislative guarantees to back them up, people's faith in the banking system was largely restored. Banks could now reopen their doors without fear of a run, and individuals and companies began depositing their monies back in the banks. Even so, many Americans who lived during those times still harbored a deep distrust of banks and were slow to resume using a bank as a safe repository for their money. This is just the first of what FDR is going to, or what's dubbed as FDR's first 100 days, where you see a ton, like 15 pieces of major pieces of legislation, New Deal legislation, are going to be passed with the Democratic Congress. And these pieces of the legislation are going to really address the three goals of the New Deal: relief, recovery, and reform. These are the goals of the New Deal legislation that were passed from 1933 to 1935. And because of the immediacy of need, relief, and recovery, these were the priorities of the first 100 days of the new Congress, from March 9th to June 16th, 1933. And through his brain trust, and when he was developing a plan for how to tackle this Great Depression, the first New Deal, Roosevelt aimed to seek practical solutions to real-world problems. And he wants to do so on this broad scale that was a departure from any previous practice of legislating either general guideline laws or very specific laws to address closely defined problems. Along with programs of the New Deal, the Congress is going to approve legislation that gave the president powers unprecedented in American history. And so this creation of multitudes of programs was a new phenomenon in America. And once again, to communicate with the American people and to reassure them about this blizzard of changes, Roosevelt is regularly going to address the nation via radio, and he's going to do so, once again, getting public support with these fireside chats, these informal conversations that he has with the American people. This, again, in itself was a novelty, but in these distressed times, people took great comfort from hearing from FDR telling them that things were on the way to get better. Looking at the first New Deal, and really due to the haste of their creation, the track record of these new programs was uneven. Some were notably more successful than others. Many of the programs overlapped in their areas of concern, some contradicted one another, and a few even produced negative results. But from a psychological perspective, however, this flurry of activity was what the country needed. Something was being done, and with this new optimism, people pulled themselves out of that lethargic, mood that had been plaguing America from 29 to 33, and things began to happen. Now, did it work? Well, economists debate whether Roosevelt's programs or the natural progress of the economic cycle played a greater role in getting the country on the road to recovery. But the lasting legacy of the New Deal was to reinstate a progressive stamp on national politics and to temper traditional American laissez-faire with enough regulation to moderate the boom and bust cycles characteristic of capitalism. And so, we're going to talk about in the next video some of the things that Roosevelt does during the first New Deal, and some of his some of the New Deal programs that are going to be implemented during 33 to 35. So stay tuned.